Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Today we are joined by what could be considered two ordinary people. Not more ordinary than probably your next door neighbor, but certainly extraordinary in a decision that they made by taking a trip through the animal kingdom. The book is The Sarcastic Lens. It's an ordinary couple's photographic journey through the animal kingdom. And I thought we would go ahead and present this for those of you out there who are trying to figure out something exciting to do, perhaps. Throw a little adventure into that midlife. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today, Richard and Amy Lynn. Richard, Amy, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Well, thank you for having us.
This is exciting. What made you guys decide to do something like this?
Well, we've done a lot of traveling through our life, and people are always asking us, for copies of our photos, and we'd sort of put together highlight albums, and we had a 60th birthday, and we decided to kind of put it all in one place and do a book.
Now, who took most of the photographs? Was it a balance of both of you?
Yes, the whole book is really a balance of both of us. Through the years, we've both shot equally. Prior to Richard's retirement, he hardly took any photos at all. I took most of the photos. And then once he retired, he became sort of obsessed and started taking a lot of photos. But sometimes even when we get the photos developed, we're not even sure who took the photo because, often we're shooting the same thing, so that it's hard to tell at that point. We only know from which camera it came, and if that gets lost, then we don't even know who took them. So, yes, the photos are very evenly divided. I would say Richard probably did a little bit more of the writing because he had more time. He's retired. I'm still working. So, but it's a partnership, definitely.
Well, it certainly was a lot more fun than sitting around and playing golf, that's for sure.
I don't know. He might disagree with you about that.
Let's not get carried away, but yes, it is. You know what? There's no winner or loser in photography, and so that's one advantage to wildlife photography over golf.
Now, how did you decide? Was this something that you did over a course of a year, 2 years, 5 years? What was the time frame here?
Well, the photos are really 30-plus years of traveling, although I would say most of them are after 2005. In 2005, I went gorilla trekking with my girlfriend and shot both digital and film, and the digital pictures were so far superior. That's kind of when we switched to digital. And, of course, digital is just so much easier to manipulate in terms of publishing and, emailing and doing things with, so that, in fact, after 2005, we went back to a lot of places that we'd already been to reshoot digital photos of certain animals and things. So it's been a very long time that we've been shooting wildlife because that's been our real love. But the book only really, we kind of turned 60 and said, let's do a book. And it took about a year to put it together because it's a fairly large book. It's 280 pages and over 700 photographs. So it took a surprising amount of time to put that all together.
There was also about a 20-year hiatus when we were doing something called having children. So we didn't really do as much traveling.
That's plenty of wildlife as it is, isn't it?
Yeah, that's for sure. But I have to say they were actually pretty good travelers, too. So we were able to do some traveling with them, but not certainly, by the end when we really knew we were going to do a book or were thinking about doing a book, there was a huge push on travel to get we had certain things that we decided had to be in the book, so there was a huge push to get those photographs of those particular animals.
Now, give our listeners a scope of where you traveled to get a lot of these photographs that you have here in the book.
Well, we've been to all 7 continents, so that includes Antarctica and all the other places you can go. We've been to over 50 countries. If you think of an animal, we've probably been there to photograph it. That's really our passion. I mean, we go to the major destinations. In fact, we're doing a book, too, Destinations of the World, because when you go to India to shoot tigers, how could you not go to the Taj Mahal and, other places like that? So we've been collecting photos of that as well. But we've been a lot of places. We've really, really scoured the globe looking for unusual animals, things that we wanted to see and experience. So we've been all over.
Near the end, not only do we shoot some unusual animals, but I think one of our goals especially near the end, was to try and shoot any animal that most people would have heard of, so that there would be nothing that somebody would say, well, is there a so-and-so in your book? And we would have to say no. We think it would be hard-pressed for anybody to come up with a normal animal that isn't in the book. For example, near the end, one of our last trips, we went to kind of an odd place called Svalbard, which is an archipelago very north of Norway in the Arctic Circle, specifically to shoot walruses, because we decided that walrus was an animal that a lot of people have heard of, and we didn't want anybody to say, well, there are walruses in your book, and have us say no. So at the end, we were very cognizant of trying to find any animals that we had left out.
Plus, I wanted to see walrus. They're so cool.
Yeah, no kidding, especially the large
really
groups
cool.
they hang out in.
Yeah, that was an amazing experience.
Now, I know that one of them I wanted you to talk about, because it's one of my favorite animals, is the leopard. Now, this isn't something that's easy to actually capture on film. Tell us about that.
Well, leopards, surprisingly, are the most prevalent cat in Africa, and yet they're the most elusive, so that you very rarely see a leopard. A lot of the times, I think the first couple of times we were in Africa, if we saw one the entire trip, we really considered ourselves very lucky. But the last time we were in South Africa, we had an incredible experience, not necessarily a happy experience, but we found a mother and a grown son walking around, absolutely gorgeous, so we got amazing photographs. And then a rogue male came into the area and decided that he was going to try and kill the baby. Apparently he had killed the other sibling when it was quite young, when it was a really small cub, and now he was back to get the other sibling. And we watched this whole thing play out. The baby went up the tree. The mother tried to protect it. In the end, the rogue male wound up killing the mother.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was really kind of, you think, it's all really fun and games, and you kind of forget sometimes that this is real nature, that she tried to protect the baby. He wound up killing her because apparently she was impregnated by another male, so she never would have mated with him anyway. And it was so horrifying, we actually left because we didn't want to see what happened to the baby. It was just really just too wrenching to watch the whole thing. But we've been in contact with the game park where we stayed, and apparently the baby survived. The real father came back into the territory and protected the baby, and the baby's hunting on its own. So at least I feel like the mother didn't die in vain. But it was an incredible, drama that played out right in front of us. You think it's always, nature is fun and fuzzy and cute and frolicking, and there really is a negative side to it, which we hadn't really experienced that much of, outside of animals, killing to eat. This just seemed to be killing for, no reason.
Mm-hmm.
The first time we went to Africa, which was to Kenya back in 1983, we saw everything everything you would expect to see, except for a leopard. And the very last game drive, at the very last moment, as we were driving back to the lodge, we saw a leopard. And we've always sort of thought that they just planted that leopard there to make sure that we had seen everything before we left. So yes, they're not easy to find, but we've been lucky enough to have some amazing experiences with them.
Mm.
Beautiful.
I was going to say, one of the animals that you photographed is really an interesting one, because it wasn't until probably about 3 months ago that I'd first heard of it. And, I love watching animal documentaries, and just, who doesn't like a good animal documentary? But this one was on the honey badger, which was actually part of a snake documentary that I was watching. Now, this animal here, it's right up there with the wolverine, actually.
Oh, yeah.
They say pound for pound, it's the most vicious animal around.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, there are some YouTube videos out there on them which apparently have gotten millions of hits. And I have to give my wife credit that she's we've spotted them twice, and they're not too easy to spot. And she actually found it both times before our guide found it. And she's actually a very good animal spotter. If she ever loses her day job, she can get a job as a spotter. But she found them both times.
Because you were having a difficult time doing the leopard.
I can't read the menu in front of my face, but I can spot honey badgers.
Uh-huh. Well, what was interesting, too, about the honey badger is that it decided to tangle up and go after a snake, and I think it was an adder of the adder family, and the snake actually struck the badger, bit it.
Oh, really?
And what had happened is you thought for sure that the snake had actually killed the badger. And about an hour and a half later, the badger just wakes up and finishes eating the snake.
Wow.
So apparently they're immune to any of the toxins from any of the vipers. I thought, well, there's a reason an animal could be fearless.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. But the animal kingdom is really amazing in so many ways. I do a lot of research. I keep a journal, very intensive journal, when we travel, because when we're done with the trip, we pick about 500 pictures, best pictures, and I put those in an album with the journal, so it's sort of a storybook of the whole trip. And so I do a lot of research on the animals before we go, and when you really get into how these things survive and what so many of these things, the migrations that they go through to get from A to B to C, the things they do to have children and things that they are able to do and the odds that they overcome. It's amazing there are any animals. Some of them, some of these stories are just amazing.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you think was probably the most enjoyable of the animals to photograph? I'm sure they all were for their own unique reasons, but did you find some of them that in the wild they just seemed like they were approachable and playful?
Well, the thing about like the big cats and the predators, they're always easier to photograph because they're not afraid of anything. When you pull up next to a lion or a cheetah in a Jeep, it doesn't run away because it's not afraid of you. Actually, a lot of the lower animals like warthogs and antelope are much more difficult to photograph because the minute the Jeep stops, the animals take off. So those are really much more challenging. The big cats and, of course, elephants and a lot of the large mammals are much more satisfying to photograph because you don't feel like you have to be in such a hurry. They'll actually sit there, they'll lie there, they'll pose for you, so they are much easier to photograph.
I'll give you one that I think is fun. The giant anteater in South America, which is kind of an odd animal, is one of the ones where you can actually get out on foot and follow it around because it determines a lot by smell, and as long as you stay upwind of it on the correct side of the wind, you can actually just walk very close to it, and it's not bothered by you at all. And they're not easy to find, but we found two in our travels, and it's different than most of the other big mammals because you can get out and follow it around on foot.
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing I was really surprised by is that you didn't have any photographs of any chimpanzees wearing diapers.
No.
So apparently chimpanzees don't wear diapers out in the wild, do they?
Yeah, apparently they don't. They're not very nice, the chimpanzees. I didn't. Of all the apes, they were my least favorite, I have to say. Very aggressive.
Yeah, people are very surprised when they find out just what a chimpanzee is like in the wild, and they're not very nice animals at all, very formidable in groups, actually.
Right, well, they're not, like the cute little cuddly things they see on TV. Yeah, they're much more sophisticated and much more, they're very heavy, surprisingly heavy. I had one on my back, and I couldn't believe how heavy it was. But they're very aggressive.
I know there was a time that we were up at a water park and they had an opportunity that you could take a photo with a small chimpanzee. And so my girlfriend encouraged us to do this. And it was funny because this chimpanzee jumps into my lap, puts his hand behind my head and is just looking at me. And I didn't know what this thing was going to do. I'd never had a chimpanzee in my lap before. And I was just thinking in the back of my mind, what if this thing just flips out and just starts biting my face? I just didn't know what to do. Next thing you know, it turns around, puts his hand behind her head. The guy takes a photo, and the thing jumps up and jumps back up onto this little platform. And apparently there's only a period of time of interaction that this occurs. But I said, there'd be no way I would allow myself to do this out in the wild.
Well, obviously, the book is all the animals are photographed in the wild. And I'll give you just a quick anecdote on that, and the fact that the very last trip we took was a specifically designed trip to photograph a couple of birds that, for whatever reason, we had decided had to be in the book. And one of them was a beautiful bird called a scarlet ibis, which, surprise, surprise, is very scarlet. And about a week or two before we went on the trip, we were taking our grandchildren to a small local zoo about 10 minutes away. And there, of course, was a whole flock of scarlet ibis in the zoo. We kind of look at each other and say, and yes, we're going halfway around the world to photograph these birds.
And you also have birds in different ways that you show them, like birds eating fish, for instance, so forth. Talk about how you came to that decision to photograph in the way that you did.
Oh, Richard loves birds eating fish. Oh, God. He could do a whole book of birds eating fish.
Well, we came lately to birds. We didn't really start photographing birds too much in the beginning. But when you're out looking for the big mammals, you find out that there's a lot of downtime, and there are a lot of more birds around than there are mammals, and they're very interesting. There are a lot of very pretty birds, very big birds, pretty birds, and then if you sit and watch them long enough, all of a sudden you see them fish, and that became very interesting. The concept of these birds eating these enormous fish is it's amazing. They have a way of doing this in order to position the fish in just the right way in order to get it down. Several times we've seen them with fish that seem like they're bigger than they are, and they still manage to get them down. Amy is correct. Birds eating fish is one of my favorites.
Well, speaking of fish, I believe that's you that's swimming with a stingray, isn't it?
That is me.
Yes.
Amy was in as well with the stingray, but the picture in the book is me. That's in Grand Cayman Island, with a place called Stingray City, which is almost like a zoo in the middle of the ocean. They just take you out there and you swim with these stingrays. It's really quite amazing.
Wouldn't that be a little dangerous, though, considering what had happened to Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter?
It's a different kind of stingray.
Is that right?
Not the same kind.
I don't think it would be good for tourism if they were losing a lot of tourists.
I would say it wouldn't be.
Yeah, I think if people were getting killed every week, probably not a lot of people would go there.
In fact, they give you little fish to feed them, and there's this concept of what they call a hickey, a stingray hickey, when they kind of mouth you in order to get these fish.
Oh, boy. Now, I bet photographing underwater, especially when you were going to do the rays and the sharks, might have been a little challenging. Tell us about that.
Well, we have one story in Tahiti where we were photographing sharks, and they're reef sharks, they're harmless sharks, but our kids were probably about 10 at the time, and we get in the water, and the guide puts a rope in the water and tells us all to stay on one side of the rope. Like somehow the sharks are not going to come back and forth. And, of course, we get in there, and we're on one side of the rope, and the sharks are merrily swimming back and forth, and our two children are merrily sitting in the boat watching us. I guess they didn't mind if their parents got eaten by sharks, but they weren't coming in to deal with the sharks. That's pretty funny. Now, when it comes to getting this together, you'd mentioned earlier in the program about how, first of all, you did a lot of the research on the animal, so you really came to understand the territory and its potential behavior, so you can position yourself. But what are some other things if somebody is considering a trip like this, and it just sounds interesting, the steps to prepare to do something like this?
Well, I think first of all, you need to know what you like to do. I'm a big believer in people owning their own vacation. I know the first time we went to Africa and we came back, somebody said to us, why would you want to go to the Bronx Zoo for 2 weeks? Clearly that person shouldn't be going to Africa, and yet to us, it's a thrill. It's the thrill of the hunt. It's the thrill of the collection of the photographs. It's the thrill of just seeing these animals in their wild habitat. So you have to go, if you really want to do these kind of trips, you have to be somebody who's really loves animals and is into the quest to find them. So that's the first thing, is that you really need to know what you want to do. If you want to go on vacation and sit on a beach and read a book, and that's a valid vacation for a lot of people, then you may not want to be running around, because a lot of these trips are very tiring. You have to be up early in the morning for the animals. You're driving around all day. It's extremely hot, things like that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you need to know your physical limitations. A lot of these things are hard to find. You may have to hike or do a lot of strenuous activity to find them, unlike a trip to, say, Africa or some of the places where you find the animals where you're sitting in a Jeep. It's very easy to see these animals because you get in some sort of large Land Rover type vehicle and you get driven around everywhere, so they're not very physically taxing. So those, I think, are the first two considerations that people have to think about before they decide to go anywhere. I guess the third one is how far are you willing to fly? There's a lot of really interesting things to see in the United States. We're also, we work off of lists, so we're trying to do all the national parks. We're pretty close, but we still have a few more left to do. But there's a lot of really beautiful things to see, within the United States. So if you don't want to fly, 16 hours to Johannesburg, maybe you want to go out west and take in all the beautiful national parks out there.
I would just add that I think people also have to understand that there's a lot of downtime. It's not like a zoo.
Right.
And so, in a lot of these places, I'll give, again, South America as an example. We're very lucky to get a lot of nice pictures of jaguars, which is a beautiful animal like a leopard. But in order to do that, we were sitting in a boat for 10 hours a day in 100-degree heat, and out of those 10 hours, maybe a half hour or so a day, we would see jaguars. And so the other time it's a lot of downtime, which is where we started making all our sarcastic comments to pass the time. And unlike in Africa, where you may be looking for a lion or a leopard, and in the interim you're seeing giraffes and zebras and gazelles, in South America, when you're not seeing the jaguars, you see some other animals, but it's not of the same magnitude. So, I think most people, if they were going to start on a big wildlife trip, something like Africa is a lot easier to do because there's more excitement. You get more. There isn't as much downtime. As you look for more esoteric animals like tigers in India or jaguars in South America, there's a lot more downtime, and the animals you're seeing in the interim are, to the casual observer, not as exciting.
How
and
about
of course, Antarctica, I would say, for anybody who's willing to make the time and the effort to get to Antarctica is, an amazing wildlife destination as well. And there, the wildlife is guaranteed. The penguins and the seals are going to be there. There's no worry about that.
How about the red panda? Was that a relatively hard animal to find?
Well, that's a very difficult animal to find in China, but fortunately, that's a little bit of I don't want to use the word cheat, but I guess I will. It's a little bit of a cheat in the sense that the one that we found was in a kind of habituated panda, as opposed to one that was really in the in the true wild, if you will.
Now, did you find yourself shooting a lot of photographs to finally get the ones that you thought would be most ideal for the book and your collection as well?
Oh, absolutely. We shoot thousands of photos and agonize over, which one we think is the best.
One of the hardest things we do is delete all the pictures. You have to go through thousands of pictures.
But you see, one thing that's nice to know, though, is I bet you were thankful for the digital camera, right?
I have to say, that's been a huge revolution, lugging all that film. And don't forget that all had you couldn't take it through the X-ray, so it all had to be scanned, individually. It was hugely time-consuming. You were very worried. And, of course, you didn't know what pictures you had.
Right.
The beauty of shooting digital is you see the picture right on the back of the camera. So you know if the lighting is good, you know that if it's in focus, you have a lot more information. So, yeah, boy, do we overshoot. And, of course, that's part of the game, if you will, is we have a lot of great pictures, but can you always get a better picture?
Sure, absolutely.
So there's always something to go after.
Now, what was the most surprising animal for the two of you to photograph as far as when you were in the wild, you didn't really know about that particular animal's behavior outside of course, the research you did, that it was the way that it was actually in the wild?
I guess I'll start with that one. I would say it's one of the most surprising and interesting adventures we had on that was in Australia with the platypus, the duck-billed platypus, which was always kind of a favorite of mine just because it's such an odd animal. And we were out in the wild with a guide very late at night there. It was, with the time difference, you sort of lose track of how different it is. And it stays light very late in Australia, and it's kind of a nocturnal animal when we were shooting it. And it was literally, we were having a picnic out in some backwoods in Tasmania, and we were looking in streams trying to find this, it's a kind of a small animal, and we literally, literally found the one that was in the book at 1 o'clock in the morning in some back stream in Tasmania, and here we are too, you know, as we like to say, ordinary people from New Jersey, shooting a duck-billed platypus in a brook or a stream in Tasmania at 1 in the morning. That's kind of a wow moment, if you will.
And how about for you, Amy?
Well, I think the farthest we ever went to get anything that we really sought out was the Komodo Dragons. We'd both really heard about those since childhood. And, you know, it has kind of a mystical dinosaur aura to it. And we were going to just go to Rinca, which is an island in Indonesia where you can see them, because Komodo Island was just so far away. And I finally said, really, we're going to go all this way and not go to Komodo National Park? So we wound up going all the way to Komodo to actually see the dragons on Komodo Island. So that was kind of a thrill, because that's something we'd both sort of heard about, you know, ever since we'd been kids. And you know, to actually see them and experience them and everything, it was very cool.
I know Komodo dragons, too, can be very dangerous if you're not paying attention.
Yes, apparently someone was just bitten by one at a zoo recently.
Yeah, and what's fascinating about that is, you know, they'll either ambush or they're finding something sick or dying, or they'll take an opportunity. I was, you know, again, I love animal documentaries, and I was really surprised by what I had seen, but this dragon just came up and lightly nipped an ox, like, on the ankle. But that's all it needed to do.
Yeah.
And then all it did is it started following this thing around for the next 3 weeks until it finally got too sick to do anything, and then it was lights out. And I'm thinking, wow.
Yeah, it's an interesting process. Yeah, they basically infect the animal and then just wait for the infection to take hold, and the animal keels over, and there's lunch.
and like most reptiles, they can be very misleading, because most of the time when you see them, the few we were able to see there, they're just lying around doing nothing, and it looks like they'll never move, kind of like an alligator.
Right.
But when they do want to move, they can move very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating book for a lot of people out there. It's called The Sarcastic Lens, and it's a couple's journey around the world photographing animals, and I'm sure there's going to be animals you'll be asking yourself, well, I wonder if they have that one, and I can pretty much tell you it will be in there. Is there a website that people can find out more about this?
Yes, absolutely. It's www.thesarcasticlens.com.
And what are your plans now? Are you going to do deep-sea photography, or what's next on the agenda?
Oh, we have all sorts of plans and lists and everything. We're going to Fiji in August for our 40th anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We're working on book 2, which is the top 100 destinations of the world. So that will be more like, you know, cities and familiar landscapes and things like that. We're working on getting all the national parks. We have a lot of lists that we would like to complete.
And well, there you go. To answer your question about deep-sea photography, part of the Fiji trip is to also go to another island nearby, Tonga, to swim with humpback whales, and yes, hopefully take pictures of them underwater. Although we're really not underwater photographers, but a whale is so big that maybe we'll get it lucky.
And that was a stingray to play with. It was a pleasure to have you both on the program today. And again, you can find out more by visiting their website, thesarcasticlens.com. Richard and Amy, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
You betcha. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can discover more also by visiting us at Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50. And also follow us on Twitter at Beyond50Radio as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.